Please like, comment and subscribe for more terrifying stories. In August of 1977, inside a small council house in North London, a single mother and her 4 children became the centre of one of the most famous paranormal cases in modern history. The address was 284 Green Street, Enfield. At first, it sounded almost ordinary. Strange knocks in the walls, furniture shifting slightly out of place, children complaining that something was moving in their bedroom. But within days, the haunting would explode into flying objects, unexplained voices, police reports, investigators, journalists, skeptics, and one terrified family trapped inside a house that seemed to have turned against them. This is the story of the Enfield Poltergeist. The family living inside the house was the Hodgson family. There was Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, and her children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. The activity reportedly began on the night of August 30th, 1977. Janet and her brother were upstairs when they heard strange shuffling noises. They told their mother that their beds were moving. Peggy went into the room, assuming the children were playing around. Then she saw it herself. A chest of drawers allegedly slid across the floor by itself. Peggy pushed it back. Then it moved again. This time, it seemed to resist her, as if something invisible was pushing from the other side. Terrified, Peggy grabbed the children and ran next door for help. Their neighbours came over, and they too claimed to hear knocking sounds from inside the walls. The knocking had no clear source. It answered questions. It seemed intelligent. And the more attention it received, the worse everything became. Before long, police were called to the house. One officer, Constable Carolyn Heaps, later reported seeing a chair move across the floor on its own. Not tip over, not shake. Move. That police report became one of the details that made the Enfield case so hard to ignore. Because this wasn't just a family telling ghost stories. Now there were neighbours, journalists, police officers, and investigators stepping into the house and witnessing things they claimed they could not explain. Soon, the story reached the press. Reporters from the Daily Mirror arrived. Photographers set up cameras. And paranormal investigators entered the case. The 2 most famous were Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair, both connected to the Society for Psychical Research. Grosse had recently lost his own daughter, which made the case personal for him. Janet Hodgson, the 11-year-old daughter, quickly became the centre of the activity. Objects were said to fly across rooms, toys were thrown, chairs flipped, blankets were pulled away, books and objects moved without warning. And then came the most disturbing part of the case. The voice. A deep, rough, unnatural voice began coming from Janet. It did not sound like an 11-year-old girl. It sounded like an old man. The voice claimed to be several different entities at different times, but one name became the most famous: Bill Wilkins. According to the voice, Bill had once lived in the house. He claimed he had died there, sitting in an armchair downstairs. The voice described his death in blunt, unsettling detail. Years later, the son of a man named Bill Wilkins reportedly confirmed that his father had died in that house, in an armchair. That detail became one of the strongest pieces of law surrounding the Enfield case. Because if Janet was faking, how did she know? The investigators recorded hours of audio. They asked the voice questions. They studied Janet's throat. Some claimed the voice came from false vocal cords, something difficult and painful to sustain for long periods. Others believed Janet was simply throwing her voice. But the recordings were chilling. The voice was aggressive, mocking, and sometimes obscene. It seemed to enjoy upsetting the family. And Janet was often left exhausted after the episodes. But the case did not stop with voices. Some of the most famous images from Enfield show Janet apparently suspended in mid-air, captured by photographer Graham Morris. Believers say the photos show levitation. Skeptics say they show Janet jumping from the bed. And that is where the Enfield case becomes so fascinating, because almost every piece of evidence has 2 versions. One version says this was one of the most documented hauntings in history. The other says it was a mixture of childhood pranks, media attention, grief, stress, and exaggeration. And the truth may sit somewhere in the middle. Janet and Margaret were caught faking some incidents. Investigators witnessed them bending spoons and trying to trick people. Janet later admitted that some of the activity was fake, but she also insisted that most of it was real. That one admission gave skeptics everything they needed. If some of it was faked, how could any of it be trusted? But believers argue the opposite. If the girls were under constant pressure, surrounded by adults, cameras, reporters, and investigators, maybe they faked small moments because people were demanding proof on command. Maybe they felt trapped inside their own haunting. Or maybe the whole thing spiraled out of control. The Enfield poltergeist became a media storm. Reporters camped outside. The family became famous. The house became notorious. And Janet, still only a child, was placed at the center of a supernatural circus. Some investigators believed the haunting was connected to Janet's emotional state. In classic poltergeist lore, activity often surrounds adolescents, especially children under extreme stress. The word poltergeist means noisy spirit. But many researchers believe poltergeist cases may not be ghosts at all. They may be linked to unconscious psychokinetic energy. In other words, the haunting may not come from the dead. It may come from the living. That theory has followed the Enfield case for decades. Was Janet haunted? Or was Janet somehow the source? The activity lasted for months, with the most intense events taking place between 1977 and 1978. Eventually it faded. The house quieted down. The cameras left. The investigators moved on. But the story never disappeared. The Enfield poltergeist became one of Britain's most famous supernatural cases, inspiring books, documentaries, television dramas, and horror films. But for the Hodgson family, it was not just a legend. It was their life. Years later, Janet said the haunting ruined her childhood. She said people judged her, mocked her, and accused her of lying. And yet, she continued to say that something truly happened in that house. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. Enough to terrify her. Enough to terrify her mother. Enough to convince neighbors, police officers, and investigators that something strange had taken hold of 284 Green Street. So what really happened in Enfield? Was it a ghost? Was it a hoax? Was it a case of mass hysteria? Was it a troubled child under pressure, creating phenomena she did not fully understand? Or was there truly something inside that house, something using Janet as its voice? That is why the Enfield poltergeist remains so powerful. It does not give a clean answer. It gives fragments. A moving chair. A terrified mother. A strange voice in a child's throat. Photos of a girl in mid-air. A dead man's name. A house full of witnesses. And just enough doubt to keep the story alive. Because the scariest hauntings are not always the ones we can prove. They are the ones where every explanation leaves something behind. And at 284 Green Street, Enfield, something happened. Something loud. Something violent. Something that turned an ordinary family home into one of the most debated paranormal cases in history. And whether it was a spirit, a hoax, or something stranger than both. The house in Enfield has never truly let go of its story.